Hi, everybody. Good evening. And thank you. Thanks for coming and thanks even more for coming back. So tonight we're going to work on the dry Salvages. And this is number 3 of the 4 quartets. And the element of this, this particular piece is water. East Coca was earth and Burnt Norton was air. So this is water. And just to give you a little background on the dry Salvages, it's a small group of rocks with a beacon off the northeast coast of Cape Ann, Massachusetts, where Eliot spent summers as a child. He grew up in St. Louis. So the river here he's speaking about is the Mississippi. And the ocean and the sea he's speaking of is the Northeast Atlantic. So in this section, in this quartet, we find familiar themes and new themes related to time and mortality, getting closer into mortality, and also some new themes that we'll hit as we go along. So just a few more references here. The groaner he's referring to is a buoy that whistles when the wind blows. And the ailanthus tree is known as the tree of God or the tree of heaven that gives off a very rancid odor. I don't know how that kind of came about. And I invite you to pay particular attention and feast on the music of this first movement as you really see the mood of water in the sounds and the rhythms flowing into each other in this first section. I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable, patient to some degree, at first recognized as a frontier, useful and trustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities, ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget, unhonored, unpropitiated by worshippers of the machine, but waiting, watching and waiting. His rhythm was present in the nursery bedroom, in the rank ailanthus of the April dooryard, in the smell of grapes on the autumn table, and the evening circle in the winter gaslight. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation, the starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone, the pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. The sea has many voices, many gods, and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose. The fog is in the fir trees. The sea howl and the sea yelp are different voices, often together heard. The whine in the rigging, the menace and caress of wave that breaks on water, the distant rote in the granite teeth, and the wailing warning from the approaching headland are all sea voices, and the heaving groaner rounded homewards, and the seagull. And under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried ground swell. Time older than the time of chronometers, older than the time counted by anxious, worried women, lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future, between midnight and dawn, when past is all deception, the future futureless, before the morning watch when time stops and time is never ending. And the groundswell that is and was from the beginning, clangs the bell. So we're going to get into some of the commentary here. And again, here we see the rhythms and the patterns of nature tracing through everything. And Eliot finds what is normally seen as unconscious elements and forces imbued with personality, seen as conscious, with will and moods and seasons and ranges, you know, many gods, many voices. And at this point, I'd like to return to the Heraclitus epigraph at opening the poem, which always gives the reader a clue, begins the trail of candy clues into the poem. So Heraclitus, ancient Greek, although logos is common to all, most people live as if they had a wisdom of their own. The way upward and the way downward are the same. So the ancient Greek idea of logos, which is common mind, source of genius and knowledge, a joint force of knowledge and understanding and genius. This was lost in favor of separation and individual effort as Western civilization evolved. Buddhism would call this interdependent co-arising, what we're talking about logos here. And we're now reclaiming this in our time via new science, quantum physics, neurobiology, neuroscience, Sheldrake's morphic field, and nature's reality of interactive networks versus the dominant human hierarchy. Eliot presents the river as a reminder of what men choose to forget. That's a quote from the poem, a reminder of what men choose to forget, which is this, this unbridled natural force. He describes it in a way, presents it as more alive than humans, the worshippers of the machine, as he calls them. The children's laughter in the foliage is too much reality to bear for humans, yet it's within us. This energy is within us, it's all around us. We're imbued, just as with the Chinese jar in the first quartet. We can't escape that resonance. So the themes in this, we're still dealing with pattern and more in rhythms now and seasons. And in seemingly inert life, we're looking at seemingly inert life imbued with this untamable force, really. And really we're looking at also into being and interdependence. He's starting to present these borders that we live with as illusory. So he's talking about the river is the land's edge also. The granite, the beaches, the algae, the sea anemone, and even the salt on the briar rose, the fog in the fir trees. So this interrelationship, this interdependence of all the elements are working together, and none of which can actually exist without the others. So, and he's talking about even our debris, the torn seine, the lobster pot, the gear of foreign dead men, a part of this living, active mess of stuff. We're interwoven, we're embedded, we can't escape from it. And the implication here is radical. He's saying that we all share the same logos, the same still point, the same energy, the same stuff, the same pattern, the same dance. And what we attribute to ourselves lies within everything. And what lies within everything lies within ourselves. So there's no value judgment available, but human beings are thrown to value judgment. They're thrown to assessment. They're thrown to ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, up and down. And he's really speaking of hierarchy as we get further into the poem. Hierarchy is human illusion. The sounds and voices full of life and resonance, and this wonderful feast of sounds here, suggest that all of this is in the field. It's in the logos. That the Newtonian breaking down of unified interdependent wholes into hierarchies of separated parts, it kind of separated us from this resonance and this sense of belonging with the earth, and this with our environment. So what were interdependent wholes became hierarchies of separated parts. And this is evidenced, and he's speaking of this as all the way through the poem. It's evidenced in this 200-year experiment called the Industrial Revolution, this detour that blinded us to the nature of reality and existence. And the arrogance in this illusion is that we can conquer and own the world, nature, the forces that surround us. We can conquer and own that which creates, produces, and sustains us, without which we wouldn't exist. And it often, this offers new understanding of why he's speaking of humility as wisdom. So this human quest to conquer nature, distracted from distraction by distraction, is presented here as a fool's errand. And I have a question for the group. Does this impact your own view of your place in the world? I see myself having been affected by this in how I've addressed my life, in how I've interacted with my options and my possibilities in my life. And it would be interesting to find out if anybody has any thoughts on this from their own lives. How you interact, the choices you've made, the choices that were possible to you. Does any of this resonate in affecting, having affected those choices for you? Okay, Dorothy, you're on.
Yeah. In studying, but it's not. I don't hear myself. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Sure.
hear you. Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Studying quantum theory just reinforces my Buddhist practice of the interrelationships of everything.
Absolutely.
And the inevitability of our not knowing the kind of level of interaction that everything is. Everything is connected.
Yes.
And everything has an impact on everything else.
We missed that last bit.
I think everything has an impact on everything else.
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the concept of Indra's net, where each one of us is a jewel in this gigantic universal world, and every movement, slightest movement, affects the whole.
Yes, the butterfly's wing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's actually hitting on this in this quartet.
Right.
He's hitting on the theme of, and I'm picking it up as networks being the natural form that nature takes, and how we humans, we're obsessed with up and down, higher and lower. We've imprinted hierarchy, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the he's speaking about this too, and it's one of the themes that are coming up in this part of the poem. And I think also that I think Buddhism plays a large part. Eastern, there's definitely his Anglicanism, you know, but I believe that Buddhism has played also, Eastern religion has also, Eastern philosophy, I would say, has also played a big part in his
Yes.
ideas. Yeah, yeah, great, yes. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Any, yeah, okay. I'd like to, you know, just comment on this from my perspective. Um, you know what we have, and we'll be touching on this a little bit later on, but I want to introduce the idea now. Um, he's um, he's he's talking about how our connection to our real connection, our connection to our own core being has been interrupted. And so we're at the periphery. We're in rational thinking. We're in analysis in our left brain, and we've lost our connection to intuitive thinking, into to trusting those instincts that actually are really our true north guidance, if we can connect to that. So so I think a lot of that is going to be coming up in this particular quartet. Okay. Let's see. Just want to see if there's anything else here. Okay. All right. So we're going to go now to the second movement. And this movement, he really starts playing with, this is where he's really beginning to play with meter here. As you know, everything is iambic, a changing iambic meter here, iambic meter, to facilitate the flow. But here, just note that he wrote this poetry in between the wars, and jazz influenced very much these rhythms, particularly in this section. And you can hear syncopated, it's sort of like syncopated iambic rhythm and tempo with retards and backbeats. It's really an interesting, a really exciting, actually, combination of meter. Okay, so where is there an end of it? The soundless wailing, the silent withering of autumn flowers, dropping their petals and remaining motionless. Where is there an end to the drifting wreckage, the prayer of the bone on the beach, the unprayable prayer of the calamitous annunciation? There is no end but addition, the trailing consequence of further days and hours, while emotion takes to itself the emotionless years of living among the breakage, of what was believed in as the most reliable and therefore the fittest for enunciation. There is the final addition, the failing pride or resentment at failing powers, the unattached devotion which might pass for devotionless, the silent listening to the undeniable clamor of the bell of the last annunciation. Where is the end of them, the fishermen sailing into the wind's tail where the fog cowers? We cannot think of a time that is oceanless, or of an ocean not littered with wastage, or of a future that is not liable, like the past, to have no destination. We have to think of them as forever bailing, setting and hauling, while the northeast lowers over shallow banks, unchanging and erosionless, or drawing their money, drying sails at dockage, not as making a trip that will be unpayable, for a haul that will not bear examination. There is no end of it, the voiceless wailing, no end to the withering of withered flowers, to the movement of pain that is painless and motionless, to the drift of the sea and the drifting wreckage, the bone's prayer to death, its God, only the hardly, barely prayable prayer of the one Annunciation. It seems as one becomes older that the past has another pattern and ceases to be a mere sequence or even development, the latter a partial fallacy encouraged by superficial notions of evolution, which becomes in the popular mind a means of disowning the past. The moments of happiness, not a sense of well-being, fruition, fulfillment, security, or affection, or even a very good dinner, but the sudden illumination. We had the experience, but missed the meaning, and approach to the meaning restores the experience in a different form, beyond any meaning we can assign to happiness. I've said before that the past experience revived in the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but of many generations, not forgetting something that is probably quite ineffable, the backward look behind the assurance of recorded history, the backward half look over the shoulder towards the primitive terror. Now, we come to discover that the moments of agony, whether or not due to misunderstanding, having hoped for the wrong things, or dreaded the wrong things, is not in question. The moments of agony are likewise permanent, with such permanence as time has. We appreciate this better in the agony of others, nearly experienced, involving ourselves, than in our own. For our own past is covered by the currents of action, but the torment of others remains an experience unqualified, unworn by subsequent attrition. People change and smile, but the agony abides. Time the destroyer is time the preserver. Like the river with its cargo of dead Negroes, cows and chicken coops, the bitter apple and the bite in the apple, and the rugged rock in the restless waters. Waves wash over it, fogs conceal it. On a halcyon day, it is merely a monument. In navigable weather, it's always a sea mark to lay a course by. But in the somber season or the sudden fury is what it always was. So this is, there's a lot of unpacking to do in this. This whole thing, where is there an end of it? It's often interpreted as sort of his despair, you know, at the tragedy of World War II. And that is definitely in there. But what he's actually talking about here also is the nature of reality. So where is there an end of it? The soundless wailing, the withering of flowers dropping their petals, remaining motionless, the drifting wreckage, the prayer of the bone on the beach, the unprayable prayer of the calamitous Annunciation, which is actually resurrection. And so he's talking about there being no stoppage. Stoppage is an illusion. It just keeps on going. It just keeps on going. Death is an illusion. There's no, in this second stanza here, there's no end but addition. It doesn't end, it just gets added to, the trailing consequence emotion takes to itself the emotionless, years of living among the breakage. And this here is I believe this has to do with the war. Those emotions, we have finally the freedom to have some emotion, and we take on those years of living in the breakage, and we let go what was the most precious, and it seemed the most to be taken for granted. And I just want to look through this for a second here. So these patterns now he's investigating: nature's cycles, the time of earth, tides, winds, growth, decay, nature's movement. And the theme here on time is eternality, no beginning and no end, death, decay, composition, birth, renewal, rebirth, pattern and rhythm, ongoing, no end, just addition. And this whole thing of the pattern, this juxtaposing with meter and so on, he's looking at the idea of network as development and improvement as superficial illusions, versus everything simply being itself. There's no such thing as improvement. There's no less or more improved self in the past or the future. And these moments of happiness, the moments when we step outside of time and space and consciousness. You know, we had the experience but missed the meaning. Time is suspended, stretched, contracted, wonder occurs. And this, what he's trying to tell us is this is the only time while we're living when we are not connected to past and future. In that stillness, we catch that stillness at the center core that he's speaking about, that stillness at the center around which everything revolved. And, you know, to use a cliche, it's the peace that passeth all understanding. So he's speaking here, our own past is covered by currents of action. And we accumulate memories, and he speaks of the cargoes of dead Negroes and chicken coops and bitter apple. But like the river debris, we accumulate experience and memories, but they're ephemeral, they're stories, they're narratives and illusions spun out of imagining. They are just as, they're just wastage just as much as all of this detritus he's talking about in the rivers and in the ocean. And the rock in the restless waters. And this here, the tone is one of reflection. I sometimes wonder if that is what Krishna meant, among other things, or one way of putting the same thing, that the future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender spray of wistful regret for those who are not yet here to regret, pressed between yellow leaves of a book that has never been opened. And the way up is the way down. The way forward is the way back. You cannot face it steadily, but this thing is sure. The time is no healer. The patient is no longer here. When the train starts and the passengers are settled to fruit, periodicals, and business letters, and those who saw them off have left the platform, their faces relax from grief into relief, to the sleepy rhythm of 100 hours. Fare forward, travelers, not escaping from the past into different lives or into any future. You are not the same people who left that station or who will arrive at any terminus. While the narrowing rails slide together behind you, and on the deck of the drumming liner, watching the furrow that widens behind you, you shall not think the past is finished or the future is before us. At nightfall, in the rigging and the aerial, is a voice descanting, though not to the ear, the murmuring shell of time, and not in any language. Fare forward, you who think that you are voyaging. You are not those who saw the harbor receding, or those who will disembark. Here, between the hither and the farther shore, while time is withdrawn, consider the future and the past with an equal mind. At the moment which is not of action or inaction, you can receive this. On whatever sphere of being the mind of a man may be intent at the time of death, that is the one action. And the time of death is at every moment. The one action which shall fructify in the lives of others. And do not think of the fruit of action. Fare forward. O voyagers, O seamen, you who came to port and you whose bodies will suffer the trial and judgment of the sea, or whatever event, this is your real destination. So Krishna, as when he admonished Arjuna in the field of battle, not farewell, but fare forward, voyagers. This is a short but very full section here. The future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender spray of wistful regret for those who are not yet here to regret, pressed between the yellowed pages of a book that has never been opened. So he's talking about others who are coming to find this future, who are not yet here. However, he's talking about ourselves. He's talking about the unmet selves that we are constantly becoming. He's talking about the illusion of being versus the reality of a continuous, permanent, interminable becoming. And he's speaking of this as not only in this life, we're not the same people who left that station. We're not the same people who had that job. We're not the same person who had that conversation 5 minutes ago and is going to a conversation with another person, where we become a completely different identity. We are continuously, ever and always, from moment to moment, in a state of becoming. Being is an illusion. And we have always this unknown self awaiting us, awaiting to greet us. If we will only take up the opportunity, if we'll only take advantage of the amazing gift that is, that every moment is new. There's a new world outside and inside of us at every moment. The future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender spray of wistful regret. We are normally seen to regret the past, but he's talking about here there is no difference between our memories or thoughts of the future, or memories or thoughts of the past. They're all made up stories. So in this present huge moment of now, where every possibility is before us, we're making stories up about a past. And we think we're calling on what we call memories. We think we're calling on this computer that we're just typing in and it's bringing up this memory of the past. But that's not how it works. Every single time we recall a memory, we're making a story up. We're making a new story up every time about that experience. And this is what we call ontological shift. As we change the way we think, the way we feel, the way we see, every memory that we've ever had becomes a new story, because we are not the same person who lived that memory. We are another person at another place in time, living a story that long, long since passed. The way up is the way down. The way forward is the way back. What he's saying here is there's no difference between the past and the future. This paradox is actually a very practical, understandable idea. It's exactly the same. If we go back in the past, or if we go forward in the future, there's nothing there. There's only story. That's all we have. The Buddhists call it embellishment upon emptiness. So what he is speaking actually is being in a state of profound emptiness in the present moment, allowing the unfolding of the moment to go forward. Time is no healer. The patient is no longer here. When the train starts and the passengers are settled to fruit, periodicals, and business letters, and those who saw them off have left the platform, their faces relax from grief into relief, to the sleepy rhythm of 100 hours. So he's speaking here this time between the hither and the farther shore. And he's relating this as this moment when we actually get it, when we actually have that moment where we connect with that stillness, that center core, that core of stillness at the center of everything, that between the hither and the farther shore, right in the present moment, while time is withdrawn, considering the future and the past with an equal mind. They're not of action or inaction. And whatever sphere of being the man may be intent at the time of death, that is the one action which shall fructify in the lives of others. So that moment of pure clarity, that is what fructifies. That is where our contribution to others comes from. That is where everything we have to bring to the world lives, at that center core within us, between the past and the future, right in the present where time no longer exists. And he says here, as he says here, the time of death is every moment. We live a moment to moment to moment to moment life of deaths and rebirths. And this lovely piece, O voyagers, O seamen, you who came to port, you whose bodies will suffer the trial and judgment of the sea, or whatever event, this is your real destination, this present moment. And this present moment will always be here. And this is quite radical, what he's saying, is that it's never going to end. There is no ending. It's going to be, It's going to be a series of moments, not farewell, but fare forward voyages. And this is a beautiful sort of Christian, I think, poem. Lady, whose shrine stands on the promontory, pray for all those who are in ships, those whose business has to do with fish, and those concerned with every lawful traffic, and those who conduct them. Repeat a prayer also on behalf of women who have seen their sons or husbands setting forth and not returning. Figlia del tuo figlio, Queen of Heaven. Also pray for those who were in ships and ended their voyage on the sand, in the sea's lips, or in the dark throat which will not reject them, or wherever cannot reach them the sound of the sea bell's perpetual Angelus. So the Angelus, just grabbing my notes here. The Angelus is a prayer to God the Father, celebrating the coming of Christ, bringing peace and healing to the wounds of pain and hardship of life for those who are suffering at sea, literally and figuratively. And for women, Figlia del tuo figlio, the daughters of your son, Jesus. The Angelus is a Christian expression of the Buddhist principle of great compassion that offers universal love and peace and healing for everything. Does anybody have any thoughts or reactions to this short piece here? Anyone?
Pauline, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. Hi, Dee.
Good evening. So two comments. Going back to the previous one, somewhere smack in the middle, I thought I was literally in the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And I was thinking of when was, well, I don't know who wrote Alice in Wonderland and when was it written? Does anybody, is there?
It was written in the 19th century.
Lewis Carroll.
Lewis Carroll.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was already here. It was here as the beginning of Looney Tunes, let's say, right? Graphic Looney Tunes. So I don't know. I'm just making a comment that it's just that's okay. I have a question on why is in the previous one, number 3, because you just read 4 to us. Why is that little expression which you reviewed with us, why is it in quotes? Is it something that's well known on whatever sphere of being the mind of man may be intent at the time of death? Why is that quoted?
Yes, I think it is a quote. I think it's Arjuna.
Okay, I mean, just obviously, I mean, so I guess he presumes that people, whenever he wrote this, that people would understand what this.
Well, I think he's including a quotation from somebody else, and he's just giving he's referring to it, and I think he's just adding quotations out of respect,
Okay.
Okay. But your comment on Looney Tunes, to a child, Alice in Wonderland is Looney Tunes, but Carol is talking about a lot of, and it's no wonder that you're finding a relationship, because Carol is talking about some of the themes that Eliot's talking about here, so yeah. However, once you start to dig in and get the message that's being delivered, it's no longer quite so loony, in fact, it turns into deep wisdom. It can, if we want it, yeah.
But there's sort of a freneticism. I think that's what I meant by being at a Mad Hatter's Tea Party. You have to sort of somehow quiet his mind in order to try to get to understand what's going on. That's my impression.
Yes, and he's also using, and this is what's so great about this poem, he's using meter and rhythm to convey the sense of the emotion that's being conveyed in this poem. You know, this stuff is not easy for people to deal with. It's mind-boggling, actually, for most people to deal with, unless they've had direct experience themselves, or they've done a lot of reading on these kinds of matters. You know, it's sort of a mind-boggling look at how to see, you know, another way of seeing reality. You know.
And then my other comment was that, especially today, after hearing so many beautiful comments by priests and
yes,
other types of clergy. Forgive me for not knowing what they're called really. So all of a sudden, I felt he was being somewhat, you know, clergy-like, you know, like on a pulpit preaching to the public, and that's so. Oops, the whole thing just disappeared.
And which passage are you referring to here, dear?
Well, the one you just read for us. Oh, dear me, it's 28 pages. Do you know what page it's on? It just went away.
Well, not on the same document as you. I've got, you know, comments in this document.
Oh, okay. Well, the one you just read about the women, okay?
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
I
Sure.
don't know. I just lost everything.
Lady whose shrine stands on the promontory, pray for those foreign ships.
Here we go. Just getting back. Yeah, like that today was almost, even Biden was somewhat clergy-like in, you know, just this whole, and preaching. Now, I'm not being condescending or negative in any way when I say this, but there's a preaching like flair or aura in the last two that you have read. That's my impression.
Yes. Okay.
Like, so is he, you know, is he getting on there it is. Is he getting on a high horse? I guess that sums up my
that's an assessment. I mean, you could see him getting on a high horse if you're that way inclined. But also, you know, as he spoke last week of humility, you know, we in this quartet, we're starting to understand what he means by the wisdom of humility. You know, and he's showing us the how infinitely tiny we are in the face of all of this, you know, and how we live in our illusions of better and worse and up and down and back and forward, you know. He's just showing us our own illusions. That's how I see it, you know. Yeah.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Romero over
Hi,
on my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. What's your first name?
Anne.
Hi. Yes.
I have a question and a comment.
Yeah.
The question, this is hard even for me to believe, but I have the book of Eliot's work that I had 50 years ago in graduate school. And I have the notes of my professor still in it. So I wrote something down that I want to see what your opinion is.
Oh, I'd love to hear it. We would all love to hear it.
And it's about this very section that we're talking about. At the time of death, that is the one action, and the time of death is every moment which shall fructify in the lives of others. And he must have said, because I wrote it down, that action is the disinterested good act pursued for itself alone.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the sort of concrete thing I rely on to understand. And the thing I wanted to comment on was, because I have felt very much at sea 50 years ago and presently. I don't feel like I've made any progress about these poems.
Yeah.
But so I went to another commentator, and I did read some. Now, I don't know who Helen Gardner is, but she apparently has some very significant Eliot book.
Okay.
And the one thing that was quoted in this other commentary was, the four quartets cannot be paraphrased. Better to study the form and listen to the rhythms and cadences and not get bogged down in what Eliot means. Now, that works for me.
Yeah,
But it's also not satisfying in some ways, because I want to know what did he mean by that. I'm always wanting concrete examples, and I'm not getting them, but that's all right.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because that passage, I also see it in another way, and he gets into this a little bit further on. You know, he's making allusions here to this 200-year, you know, terrible experiment with industrialization, you know. And in this time, our mode of education drastically changed. Granted, it expanded, but it expanded to create what Eliot calls, you know, what do you call it? Of the machine. Citizens of the machine or something. But that's what our education is designed to create. And what Eliot is doing is he's liberating us here from that. He's liberating into that moment of connection, which shall fructify in the lives of others. And I see that, I see what your professor said, absolutely. And I think it goes further. What I'm seeing in this for myself is that core place of stillness, that core still center that he's speaking about, where time disappears. He's talking about doing what we love. He's talking about using our gifts and really exploring what is precious to us and making that our life. And that's where our greatest contribution to others occurs. And that's how I interpret some of this in this particular section.
That's a big help for me. Thank you. I'm going to meet myself.
And I think this whole poem, this whole 4 poems, actually 20 poems, is about the same message. It's about freeing ourselves from the tyranny. You know, last week he was talking about, in the last quartet, he was talking about the men of business letters and the petty contractors, and you know, he was talking about the bureaucrats and the people who are working only for the dollar, you know, for power and money, and he's really getting at this idea that our greatest gifts, the thing that we most love, that's most precious to us, are actually what will fructify in the lives of others, you know. So yeah, any more excuse me, any more thoughts? Dorothy, do you have any thoughts on that that last little bit there?
I see you have a question on Andres. You can ask your question.
Yeah.
Ask me if this is out of school, but this is a question regarding part 1 that we covered 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Just curious if you could give some examples of the audacity of success, or point us to where I could see some of those.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, we're actually getting to that. But I can take a little side trip here and talk about it right now. Just to dare to live this life he's talking about, given given our industrial education, given our culture, given the values in our culture, just the idea that we can go off on our own and do what we like and turn that into a life takes massive audacity, because we have to buck every sensible idea that the world gives us, every sensible notion that the world is presenting to us, to really live this life of freedom, you know, in moment to moment, in this space of freedom and creation and expression. You know, those moments that fructify most in the lives of others, it takes massive audacity to set upon that course.
No, yeah, that. So I guess Eliot would be the role model. I'm just wondering if there are any others.
I don't think he's a role model. Yes, I suppose he is a role model. Yes, yeah. And there are many others, you know, artists, writers, but, you know, Elon Musk, you know, whether you like him or not, you know, he's a role model in that. You know, he's doing what he's passionate about and turning it into a life and a success and service to others. You know, there are so many people who live very quiet lives, and this is the substance of their lives. And, you know, for a lot of us, for most of my life, I fed my creative talents into sort of commercially viable projects, you know. And they were never fully a labor of love until, you know, I sort of stopped at a certain point, you know, and I had all the success I'd wanted. And, you know, I hit this "is that all there is" moment. And so it took a lot of courage to step back from that and actually look at what I really just wanted to do for the love of it, and turn that into something that would be a contribution and be a living, you know. So it's actually quite rare for people. The statistics are 1 to 5 in 100, you know, if that, that are able and willing to go through what you have to go through to make that work and make it happen, you know. So really, I think Eliot's talking about a kind of freedom here that is available, you know.
Got it. No, I very much appreciate that. Thank you, Pauline.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. So any other thoughts or questions on any of this part, or?
He talks about the freedom that comes when you don't have to live up to certain kinds of stories that come from your conditioning, that determines your life. So there's never any freedom to find out who you are and what kind of creativity needs to come through you.
Yes.
So it's like loving what you do and not having secondary agendas.
Yes.
Just
Not having to the secondary agendas, you know.
Right. Well, that's the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. It is. And there's another aspect also of the Industrial Revolution, which is hierarchy. And before that, hierarchy was sort of royalty and then everybody else, you know. But the Industrial Revolution directed hierarchy into organizations. You know, this very, very tight layers of hierarchy were ingrained into organizations. And
I love his relationship to time as well. And the physicists are finding now that the past is just as legitimate as the future,
Yeah,
and that everything exists in the present moment.
exactly. Yes. And it's elastic. Elastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, I was saying, hopefully we baby boomers won't all die off, before we see this new emergence of network societies, network businesses, network industry and government, so on. So, well, does anybody have any more questions before we move forward to the next idea? Next section? Okay. Okay. So I'm looking here for this. Oh, good. Okay. To communicate with Mars, converse with spirits, to report the behavior of the sea monster, describe the horoscope, haruspicate or scry, observe disease in signatures, evoke biography from the wrinkles of the palm and tragedy from fingers, release omens by sortilege or tea leaves, riddle the inevitable with playing cards, fiddle with pentagrams or barbituric acids, or dissect the recurrent image into pre-conscious terrors, to explore the womb or tomb or dreams. All these are usual pastimes and drugs and features of the press, and always will be, some of them especially when there is distress of nations and perplexity, whether on the shores of Asia or the Edgware Road. Men's curiosity searches past and future and clings to that dimension. But to apprehend the point of intersection of timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love, ardor, selflessness, and self-surrender. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or the music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all. But you are the music while the music lasts. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood is incarnation. Here, the impossible union of spheres of existence is actual. Here, the past and the future are conquered and reconciled, where action were otherwise movement, of that which is only moved and has in it no source of movement, driven by demonic chthonic powers. And right action is freedom from past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim, never here to be realized, who are only undefeated because we've gone on trying. We, content at the last, if our temporal reversion nourish, not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil. Okay, well, I'm getting my comments here. So just a few notes here. Haruspicate is to read entrails. Scry is to read crystal balls or mirrors. Pentagrams are used by Wiccans. Barbituric acids of hypnosis. and the dissecting the recurrent image is actually ink blots. And he's talking about how common this is throughout the world. And he contrasts this exotic Asia and this working class mix on the Edgware Road in London. And he's talking about time living outside past and future, in humility, in selflessness, and self-surrender. This is the ideal that he's trying to get across. When he talks about men's curiosity searches past and future and clings to that dimension, he's saying leave past and future alone, where timeless meets time, with meditation, prayer and love, contribution and humility. You know, he's speaking of both that unattended moment, that flash of insight, that flash of transcendence, that flash of vision that happened to him in the garden in the first quartet. But he's also talking about pursuing it consciously, with discipline, with meditation and prayer and love and contribution, humility. He's talking about this unattended moment, the moment in and out of time. That's the best that most of us can expect. And I actually disagree with this, that for most of us, there's only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight. I think that in the 30s, that was the case, and the 40s and 50s and, you know, early 60s, that was the case. But time has changed. Actually, change happens with time. So what we see now is so many people who are actually pursuing these experiences, pursuing this, pursuing Eastern mysticism, pursuing the higher forms of experience in our lives. And there's actually a huge swath of humanity who are pursuing this right now. So, you know, when we talk to a lot of very traditional, say, Eastern mystics or Eastern teachers, you know, they talk about, for instance, the Buddhists tell you that it will take 7 incarnations to reach enlightenment, you know. But actually, it can hit you at any moment. It can hit you when you least expect it. The world can change in a second, in a heartbeat. How you see everything, how you interpret everything, how you understand everything can change in a heartbeat. So I think that that's old school from in that particular section. But these random moments of beauty, stillness and light that descend uninvited, as in that moment in the garden. And he's talking about these as being only hints and guesses. And the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. So to go after it intentionally with study, meditation, prayer, practice. Here, toward the end, the hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. And it's only in this conscious state, he's saying here, it's only this conscious state can we understand the union of the spheres of existence. And that means the spheres of existence, while we're, you know, here in a body, the spheres of existence he's speaking about, which is that resonance in the Chinese jar, you know, the note of the violin, you know, the resonance of the note of the violin, you know, while the violin is still. So it's really, he's really speaking of the act of meditation, of prayer, of study, as working on reconciling past, future dimensions, everything in a single moment, just as we found happens in quantum physics. You know, it's actually the nature of existence. And what we actually found in quantum physics, one of my mentors was Francisco Varela, and he is a neuroscientist, a Chilean neuroscientist, who is also Buddhist. And he's the guy who began the dialogue with the Dalai Lama, you know, measuring monks' brains, observing monks' brains in high states of meditation. And he speaks of this. He speaks of this, this possibility of uniting intention, action, past, future, in one moment, in one eternal moment. And they found this in science. This is actually what's happening in reality, you know, in these wild, wayward edges of science, at the edge of new discoveries in science. So it's actually not that far out there. And interestingly, the Buddhists have seen, and not just the Buddhists, but they've seen in meditation, in heightened experience, they've been able to decipher and discern much of what scientists were able to discern once quantum physics was discovered. And they were able to observe, you know, through their machinery, through their instruments, they were able to observe what can be observed in moments of awakening. So, any thoughts or comments while I clear my throat? Excuse me. Excuse me.
I'm going to throw something out there that I thought about last week. I can't go into much detail because my husband really is the one who's done much more reading in this. But for those who are in the same sphere that like to read, Richard Rohr, Thomas Merton, who else should I say? Thomas Berry. These notions are all being talked about in that sphere of Catholic writing. I don't know how familiar people are with their work, but can you hear me? Yes, okay.
Excuse me, I just got a frog in my throat here. Yes, that's true. And as I said before, this is becoming really a broad direction in globally in awareness. You know, even the most ordinary, uneducated people are connecting with this as well. And I think that from my perspective, we can actually create lives consciously using this understandings, these different ways of understanding the world. We can actually create our own our futures and our realities very, very differently, and live extremely fulfilled lives. And that really is actually what he's talking about. isn't it? It's at the end of the day, it's what all this is about. So this last verse, right action is freedom from past and future also. Right action, compassion, study, meditation, love, undifferentiated love. Right action is freedom from past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim, never here to be realized. Well, for a lot more of us, it is the aim here to be realized. And this last few lines, we content at the last, if our temporal reversion nourish, not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil. Our temporal reversion means this incarnation. So our temporal reversion from not being here. And it is he's speaking of this as a temporal reversion, and he's implying that these reversions continue, right? So if our temporal reversion nourish in this limited time-bound physical life experience, not too far from the yew tree, which is the yew tree symbolizing death and resurrection in Celtic culture. So not too far from death. As long as if we nourish this, not too far from the moment of death, that we can have the life of significant soil. We can earn that life of significant soil, that life of fruition and significant growth and just an amazing life, a blast, living a blast, moment to moment to moment, which is actually what it's all about. So any thoughts, any questions before we wrap up?
Pauline, can you hear me? It's Dee.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment on this line because it's one of the most humane lines I've ever read, and I don't mean humble, but humane.
Yeah.
And it's this line here. Well, I guess it really starts. And you just did it too. It's sort of you have to do the lead up. This is the aim, never here to be realized.
Mm-hmm.
Who are only undefeated because we have gone on trying.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of everything that was said today about our democracy.
Yes.
We are only undefeated because we won't give up. That's the point, because we have gone on trying. And it's just, it's like, it's so moving. It's incredibly moving. And then this concept, I wish Lee were playing, maybe Lee could hear something here. So if our temporal reversion nourish, not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil. There's, Lee, can you comment about soil? How important soil is? Soil's more important than we are, in effect, in terms of the life cycle.
And
it's the creative power. That's the point.
And soil is where we grow what we produce,
It's the creative, the life of significant
soil that's going to really produce something meaningful and worthwhile and satisfying. Yeah.
So just, it's all coming together. For you, it came together already. But I'm trying to get there.
So I have a question. Do you have any other thoughts now, based on this week, about what you said last week about Eliot copping out and
Well, I think at times he's all over the place and not controlled and just letting it all hang out, which is fine, and this is the final draft. Obviously, this is the final draft because it's here and now. But I feel
it's amazing when you say he's not controlled, he's all over the place, because if you really look at poetry and understand what he's doing here, this is just an incredible tour de force of disciplines and and technique, and it just, it doesn't end, you know, form, technique, understanding, discipline. It's just so I don't see what you see in the idea of all over the place, you know. I don't see.
Right. It's content driven. My comment is more about content, that he's all over the place. But I'm not equipped to, I'm just a guy, I am a guy in a diner. You know, I'm not equipped to comment. I have not studied this the way you have. And I'm here just for the joy and, you know, appreciation and delving and experience of this whole thing, which is wonderful.
It is.
It's
Isn't
wonderful.
it? Yeah.
Yes, it is. But I would say for me to back up what I said last week, I'd have to read it 4 more times. That's not going to happen.
Sure.
But I mean, I was giving you my impressions, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on anything?
I have a curiosity question.
Yeah.
You may have done this in the first week. We had not joined up in the first week. So you maybe have already introduced everybody. I don't want to do that now, but I'm very curious to know how many people are from your part of the woods and how many are from kind of more far afield. Just maybe next week, if there's an extra 2 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And there aren't many people here tonight because I think the election kind of reduced the attendance.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, for next week, let's do it. Yeah.
And my husband says he wants to throw something in.
One final thing.
Loud.
The last line, does that refer, in the gospel, I think it's in Matthew's gospel, unless a grain of wheat dies, it will not bear fruit. Is that is there allusion to the last line of this segment?
Wow.
Nourishing the soil.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Unless a grain of wheat dies, it will not bear fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it's interesting because he's touched on that all through the quartets, especially in 2, East Coca, you know, the houses are all gone under the sea. The dancers are all gone under the hill. You know, he talks a lot about growth and decay and regeneration and so on. So yes. So could you repeat that quote again from?
Unless a grain of wheat dies, it will not bear fruit.
Yeah.
And I'm not reading that, I'm just recalling that.
Yes.
It may be a little bit different, but that's the gist of it.
Yes. So if relating to this, I would see that as nourishing the soil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nourishing the soil.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that he's also saying about us, unless we die. And I don't think that death is necessarily a physical death that he's talking about.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the death of our ego. It's the death of our illusion. You know, a lot of what Eliot's been talking about here. Yeah.
And isn't the root of humility something about soil?
That's very interesting. I planned on looking at the etymology of humility because it's so basic to everything that Eliot's talking about. And it's really basic to all of our lives. You know, there's no point if anybody has any ambition or wants to do anything at all worthwhile or meaningful, they're going to come across humility. They're going to be humiliated. You know, you're going to be humiliated. You're going to fail an exam. You're going to fail at something. You're going to be criticized. You know, it's just going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Brene Brown talks about a lot, you know, with having a robust vulnerability, that humiliation is bearable. you know, that makes the humiliation bearable.
Mm.
And it's actually what frightens you know, most people away from going for anything, going after anything. Actually, it's the fear of being seen, of being revealed, of being humiliated. Yeah. Yeah. Some great questions this evening, guys. Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up? Dorothy, do you have anything to say?
I'm deeply moved by the profundity and understanding that he conveys in this poem. For me, it says everything that we ever need to experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's pretty expanded.
It's an amazing thing. And I really see this work. The first time I read it, I was just floored. And it was quite recent. I hadn't read this poem until a few years ago. But I really saw that he's had direct awakening experience himself. You know, it comes out of his own direct experience. It's clear. And I think that's why it's so effective, because it's the combination of that and his ability to articulate it, you know, in such beautiful form, you know. Yeah, yeah. I think this poem is really one of the greatest transcendent pieces of literature, pieces of writing ever, actually. It's right in the top few, you know. Yeah. Well, if nobody else has anything to say on that note, I think we can close this evening's.
Thank you, everyone, for zooming in and for the questions during the Q&A. It was very lively tonight.
It was a great conversation, guys. Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Pauline, for being able to present this to the audience tonight. And we'll be back next week on the 27th with part 4 at the same time with Little Gidding.
Yes, Little Gidding. And I'm hoping to get to that part of the audacity and etc. that piece in there too. Okay.
Excellent. Until then, everybody have a great rest of the week and enjoy the weekend.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.